My name is Logan Barrett, and this story starts on the day my entire understanding of family collapsed. I was 28 when my parents summoned me to our old family home, deep in the countryside of Vermont. It was a grey autumn morning, the kind that clings to your skin and your thoughts. I remember staring out the car window as maple leaves fell like burnt feathers, unsure why I even came back. The last time I'd spoken to my parents, Carol and Dennis Barrett, it was polite, distant, like an obligation. My older brother Connor was always the favoured son, the pride of the Barrett name. He was a polished version of everything I wasn't, charismatic, Ivy League educated, and always at the centre of my parents' attention. When I arrived, the house looked smaller than I remembered. Peeling paint, weeds curling through the cracks in the walkway. The once proud estate that held decades of family dinners and Christmases now looked like it had been forgotten, much like me. Mom met me at the door with a tight smile, her lipstick a little too bright. "Logan," she said. No hug, just my name like it was a chore. Dad was in the study, nursing his scotch like always. "Sit down," he said without looking up. "We have something to tell you." Connor was already there, of course, sitting on the leather sofa like he owned the place, and in hindsight, he nearly did. The moment they handed me the will, my stomach dropped. They were splitting the estate, but not equally. Connor would inherit the main estate, the Barrett Manor, with its 12 acres, the lake, the guest house, everything. And me, I got the cottage. A word they used to soften the truth. A crumbling old house on the edge of town, one storm away from collapsing. I blinked. Is this a joke? Dad didn't look up. "You've never cared about the family business. This makes the most sense. But I'm your son too," I said, my voice breaking raw. "I worked 3 jobs through college. I paid off your debts after the lawsuit. And this is what I get." Mom looked down. "Connor will carry the Barrett name. The estate should reflect that." I stared at the paper again. The ink didn't smudge. The words didn't change. In that moment, I realized something I had always feared but never wanted to believe. I was never their son. Not really. Just a placeholder, a background character in their perfect family picture. I stood up. "You're giving away my childhood to someone who never had to earn it, and you expect me to be grateful for it." No one spoke. No apologies. No remorse. That night, I packed up what little was left in my room. As I drove away, headlights cutting through the misty road, I whispered to myself, "Fine, if this is what family means to them, then I'll build a life they'll never be able to ignore again." The cottage they gave me wasn't a home. It was a graveyard of broken promises. I pulled into the driveway 2 days after the reading of the will, gravel crunching under the weight of reality. The cottage, as they called it, sat at the end of a narrow dirt road, flanked by brittle trees and strangled vines. Its shutters hung crooked. The porch sagged like it was exhaling its final breath. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. This was my inheritance. The front door creaked open with a soft groan, revealing a foyer that smelled like mold and regret. The wallpaper peeled off in strips. The floorboards whined beneath my steps. I saw raccoon droppings in the corner of what used to be a dining room. It wasn't just old, it was abandoned. I walked through the rooms, flashlight in hand, each beam revealing more rot. Cobwebs cloaked the windows, water stains streaked the ceiling, and in the back bedroom, a broken frame lay on the floor, a photo of my parents smiling in front of the estate. Connor was in the center. I was cropped at the edge, half of my face missing. Fitting, still I stayed. Partly because I had no other place to go, but mostly because I refused to let their decision break me. I rolled up my sleeves, taped garbage bags to my hands, and started tearing out the rot. For weeks I worked by day at a mechanic shop nearby, and by night with hammer and crowbar in hand. I gutted that house piece by piece. I patched holes, resealed windows, spent my savings on a second-hand water heater, and learned plumbing off YouTube. My knuckles bled, my back ached, but every repaired corner felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my worth. Still, something kept gnawing at me. Why this house? My parents had dozens of assets, rental properties, trust funds, farmland. Why saddle me with this one? One night, as I cleared out a closet in the master bedroom, my crowbar struck something hollow. Behind a false panel in the wall, I found an old metal box, rusted shut but still intact. Inside were documents, yellowed envelopes, letters, and at the bottom a deed. My heart stopped. It wasn't a deed to this house. It was to the Barrett estate, the one my parents gave to Connor, with my name on it, signed by my grandfather, dated 3 years ago. I read the signature again and again, feeling the blood drain from my face. He had left the main house to me, not Connor. My name was there, clear as day. But then, why didn't I get it? Had my parents hidden this, lied in the will, destroyed a legal inheritance? A cold knot twisted in my stomach. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was fraud, and maybe, just maybe, revenge wouldn't come from rebuilding this house. It would come from unearthing everything they tried to bury. I couldn't sleep that night. That deed, folded and creased from time, but legally sound, rested on my nightstand like a silent witness to a betrayal that ran deeper than I had ever imagined. My parents had stolen the estate, stolen it from me. The realization struck harder than anything I'd felt since my grandfather passed. He had been the only one in the family who saw me, not as a backup plan, not as a mistake, but as someone worth believing in. And now I knew. He hadn't forgotten me in his will. He had intended for me to have the estate. My parents, probably with Connor's smug complicity, had buried it. I stared up at the water-stained ceiling of my crumbling house, and for the first time in years, my hands trembled with something more than frustration. It was purpose. By morning, I had a plan. I photocopied the deed, locked the original in a fireproof box, and started making quiet inquiries. First to a local probate attorney, then to the county records office. I learned more in those next 2 weeks about inheritance law, estate transfers, and document fraud than I ever thought possible. And then the smoking gun came. At the records office, the clerk gave me a puzzled look as she compared the copies of the will I'd brought with what was officially filed. "Are you sure this was the final version?" she asked. I nodded slowly. She tapped her monitor. "Because this version has inconsistencies. The signature page seems to have been replaced. See here?" She turned the screen toward me. "This isn't your grandfather's signature." I stared. It was similar, but not the same. A forgery, a forged will. My hands clenched around the edge of the counter. Someone, likely my father or Connor, had swapped the real will for a false one after Grandpa's death. That meant the estate transfer was built on fraud, which meant I could take it back. I walked out of the courthouse that day with copies of the real will and a legal consultation scheduled for the following Monday. The sky was grey, rain pattered on the cracked sidewalk, soaking my worn boots. But I didn't feel cold. I felt a fire in my chest I hadn't known in years. They thought I'd just accept it. They thought I'd fade into the background like I always had. But they forgot something. You can only push someone into the dirt for so long before they learn how to rise from it. And this time, I wasn't coming back just to claim a house. I was coming back to reclaim my name, my dignity, and every ounce of respect they'd tried to strip away. This wasn't just a family feud anymore. This was a war built on lies, and I had the first piece of evidence in my pocket. It had been years since I last stood at the gates of Hollow Ridge Estate. Even then, I'd only ever been allowed to visit, never stay, never belong. Now I stood on the gravel driveway like a storm waiting to break, copies of the forged will and deed tucked inside my coat pocket. The sprawling estate looked the same, pristine hedges, red brick facade, wrought iron balcony above the grand double doors. Everything about it screamed legacy, the kind my parents had robbed from me. I wasn't here to knock politely, I was here for answers. Connor opened the door. Dressed in a navy blazer, wine glass in hand, he blinked like I was a ghost risen from the past. "Well, if it isn't the prodigal handyman," he sneered. "Come to borrow some sugar." "Where's Dad?" I asked. He rolled his eyes. "Inside, gloating over the new landscaping budget. Come in, but don't get mud on the rugs." I stepped inside. The warmth of the house was immediate. Fireplace crackling, chandelier glowing, laughter echoing faintly from the other room. It made me sick. "Elliott?" My father's voice rang out as he appeared from the study, holding a brandy snifter. "What are you doing here?" I held up the documents. He paused, his eyes locked on the folder, and I saw it. Recognition, not confusion, not surprise, just fear. "We need to talk," I said. "Now's not a good time," he muttered. I opened the folder and laid the documents on the hallway table. The real deed, the original will, the signature mismatch report from the records office. "I know what you did," I said. My voice was calm, but beneath it, a tidal wave of years of hurt churned. He picked up the papers with shaky fingers. Connor stepped closer, his bravado draining with every word I spoke. "You switched the will," I said. "You forged the signature. You buried Grandpa's real final wishes. And you left me with a condemned house while you gave this." I waved around at the estate to Connor. Connor sputtered. "You don't have any proof of forgery." "I do," I cut in, "and I've already spoken to a lawyer. This is a felony." My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in that moment. "Elliott, listen," he started, but I raised a hand. "No, you listen. You spent your life telling me I wasn't enough, that I didn't deserve more. And all the while you were sitting on what was mine, what Grandpa gave to me because he believed I was worth something." Connor's voice cracked. "You don't even know how to run this place. Then you should have thought about that before stealing it." My father sank into the armchair, his hands over his face. I let the silence stretch. The weight of truth had finally fallen on them, not shouted, not slammed, just laid bare in the quiet, and it was heavier than anything I could have screamed. "You have 1 week," I said quietly, "to vacate the property, or I press charges." Connor lunged forward. "You'd ruin the family for this?" "You ruined it," I replied, looking directly at my father. "You both did. Now face the consequences." I turned and walked out the door, my boots echoing on the marble floor. Outside the air was cold, but I didn't feel it. Not anymore. I had stood in the house that should have been mine, and this time I hadn't left with my head down. I had come for justice, and I wasn't done yet. The following week was a blur of attorneys, paperwork and phone calls. My lawyer, Rachel Fenley, moved fast. The forged deed and manipulated will, once validated through a notary handwriting analyst and supported by records from the clerk's office, were enough to open a civil case and trigger criminal investigation alerts. Connor tried to stall, sending rebuttal letters through their own lawyer, a smug man who sounded like he hadn't read a single document thoroughly. But the evidence was stacked high and heavy on my side. They didn't have a leg to stand on, only guilt and desperation was beginning to show. By Thursday, I received a call from a private number. "Elliott," came my father's voice, low and strangely fragile. "Can we talk privately? No lawyers." I paused. Just the sound of his voice transported me back to all the times he shut me down with a glance. But this time, I wasn't the same boy who needed his approval. "You've got 5 minutes," I said. He came alone, dressed in a plain jacket, no swagger, no brandy glass in hand. We met outside a local diner. He sat across from me at a metal picnic bench under the overcast sky, his breath clouding in the air. "I know I messed up," he started, "but I only did what I thought was right for the family." "No," I replied, "you did what was right for Connor. You didn't even tell me about the house until it was in ruins. Grandpa trusted you. He trusted you to pass on that gift, and you betrayed that." His hands trembled as they wrapped around the coffee cup. "I didn't think you'd want it," he said. "You were always so distant." I shook my head. "No, I was just never given a chance to belong." Silence hung between us. Then he looked up, and for the first time in years, there was something human in his eyes, grief maybe, or regret. "I'll step aside," he said quietly. "You win." "This was never about winning," I said. "It was about finally being seen." He nodded and stood. "We'll move out." I watched him walk away, shoulders hunched, like a man who had finally realized the weight of his own choices. By Sunday, Hollow Ridge was legally mine. When I arrived to change the locks, Connor's car was already gone. A few discarded boxes sat on the porch, along with a note in hurried scrawl. "Hope you're happy now, Tour." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the front door to the empty house. For the first time in my life, I walked through those halls without being an outsider. The light filtering through the tall windows wasn't cold anymore. It felt like a promise. The estate was worn in places, scuff marks on the stairs, outdated fixtures in the kitchen, but it was mine, not because of a title or a check, but because I had fought for it, for Grandpa's legacy, for myself. I wandered into the study, the same place I once saw my father sip brandy and ignore me from behind the paper. Now I stood behind the desk, and for the first time, I smiled, not with bitterness, with peace. But this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. With the estate legally transferred to my name, I spent the next few days walking through the old rooms of Hollow Ridge, like a man both returning home and uncovering forgotten ruins. Dust clung to the corners of the hallway, and the light fixtures flickered with age. It was grand, Yes, but beneath its beauty was the silence of secrets. One afternoon, I decided to clean out my grandfather's old study, the one my father had rarely entered after the funeral. The leather-bound books still lined the shelves, untouched. A cigar tray sat beside the window, its crystal glass holder long emptied. I opened the bottom drawer of Grandpa's desk and paused. Inside was a folder labeled for E. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled it out. It wasn't a legal document or a financial report. It was a letter, dated 6 months before Grandpa passed. Elliott, if you're reading this, then your father has likely failed you, and I'm sorry for leaving before I could fix things myself. I always knew Connor was the apple of his eye, but I also knew you were the one with the heart to carry on this family's legacy. If things have gone the way I feared they would, then I hope you found your way back to this house, because it was always meant for you. I left something else just in case. Look under the floorboard beneath the fireplace. Trust me, Grandpa will. I stood frozen, the letter still in my hands. I moved quickly to the fireplace, pulling back the old iron grate. The hearth was cold, dusty, but sure enough, there was a loose wooden panel along the edge of the brickwork. I pried it up. Inside was a sealed tin box, and inside that was a copy of the original will, the one where I was listed as sole heir to the Hollow Ridge estate. Connor's name wasn't even mentioned. There was also a USB stick, likely containing Grandpa's final video message. My hands shook as I realized Grandpa had known all along that something might go wrong. He hadn't just hoped I'd figure it out. He had planned for it. I stared at the box, the will, the letter, and a realization settled in my chest like a calm after a storm. My grandfather believed in me, even when no one else did. He'd known this day might come, and now, standing alone in the study, I understood why I had fought so hard. Not just for property, not even just for revenge, but for the truth, for my name, and for my right to claim it. The next morning, I arranged a meeting. No lawyers this time, just me, Connor, and my father. I sent the message myself, short and direct. Come to Hollow Ridge. We need to talk. They showed up just after noon, dressed in casual arrogance. Connor in his expensive blazer, my father in a smug smirk he always wore when he thought he had already won. So, my father said, glancing around the living room, playing house already? I led them both into the study and pointed at the desk. This house, I said calmly, was never yours to give away. Grandpa left it to me, legally, morally, completely. Connor scoffed. Please, you already got what you wanted, didn't you? You tricked the board. I didn't trick anyone, I cut in, but you did, and I've got proof. I tossed the folder with the original will onto the desk. Connor reached for it, but my father beat him to it. His face changed instantly, his mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. He read the document in silence. You found it, he said hoarsely. I nodded, hidden under the floorboard, exactly where Grandpa said it would be. I opened my laptop and played the file on the USB drive. A video flickered to life. Grandpa Will appeared, seated in the very chair my father was now slouching in. If you're seeing this, it means something went wrong. Maybe someone tried to rewrite history. If so, I want it on record that I left this house, this land, and every inch of Hollow Ridge to Elliott, not Connor, not anyone else. Connor's mouth dropped. My father sat pale and silent. The truth roared louder than anything I could say. You forged a version of the will, I said quietly, had it signed, filed, and buried. But this is the original, and now it's in the hands of my lawyer. You can't do this, Connor growled, stepping forward. We're family. Family, I snapped. You mean the same family that left me with a rotting house and a phony inheritance, that laughed when I left town and whispered behind my back? You don't get to use that word now. My father stood slowly, hands trembling. Elliott, son. I'm not your son, I said, my voice steel. Not anymore. He tried to speak again, but I turned away. I'd said everything I needed to say. For the first time in my life, I felt no fear, no hesitation, and no need to prove myself. The truth was enough. As they left the house in silence, Connor threw one last glare over his shoulder, but I didn't care. Let them see what real legacy looks like. The sun dipped low behind Hollow Ridge as I stood at the front porch, watching the silhouettes of Connor and my father retreat toward the road. For a long moment, I stayed there, hands in my pockets, breathing in the quiet. The old house creaked behind me, its wooden bones whispering stories that had waited years to be told, but this time the story was mine. That night I made one final call, not to a lawyer, not to the press, to Mr. Langley, Grandpa's old friend and the family's estate attorney. "The original will is secure," I said. "I've handed everything over to my lawyer. From here on it's about restoring what was meant to be." Langley chuckled softly. "Will would be proud of you, Elliott. I think he always knew you'd come back to claim your legacy. And I did, not out of vengeance, but to rebuild something honest." Over the following weeks, I moved into Hollow Ridge permanently. The estate had seen better days, but it had good bones, just like me. I hired a small team, some of whom had once worked for Grandpa, people who remembered the man, not just the fortune. We repaired the cracked foundations, sanded down the floors, replaced broken windows, and polished every banister until it gleamed. I wasn't just fixing a house, I was restoring a legacy that had been stolen from both me and him. And with every board I replaced, every wall I painted, I felt something shift inside me. The bitterness began to fade, not completely, but enough for something better to grow in its place. I reopened the vineyard Grandpa had planned in the southern field, not for profit, but for community. I invited neighbors, young and old, to take part in its revival. People who had known Grandpa Will shared stories, recipes and memories that brought the land back to life. I even started hosting monthly dinners at the estate, real family-style dinners, not the kind I grew up with, those cold, formal gatherings where you sat in silence unless spoken to. No, these were loud, heartfelt, full of laughter and clinking glasses, the kind of nights Grandpa would have loved. As for Connor and my father, word got around fast. The original will went public, and though I didn't press charges, they were forced to return what they had wrongfully taken. Connor lost his board seat. My father resigned from every remaining position he held. They faded into the background of a town that now knew who they truly were. And I moved forward. A few months later, I stood at Grandpa's grave, a simple bouquet of bluebells in hand. "I did it," I whispered. "I brought it all back. Not for revenge, but for you, for us." The wind blew softly through the trees. I swear I could hear him say, "Good, now make it better." Spring bloomed across Hollow Ridge like a quiet promise. The fields were green again. The grapevines thrived under the sun. The estate, once neglected, now stood proud, its windows bright, its doors open. One afternoon, as I finished reviewing renovation plans with the contractor, I heard a knock at the front door. It was polite, hesitant. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it, and there she was, Mara Whitaker, my childhood friend. She stood on the porch, her hair tucked into a loose braid, freckles dancing across her cheeks just like I remembered. A shy smile curved her lips. "Hey, Elliott." "Mara." I blinked, stunned. "I thought you moved to Boston." "I did," she said, glancing past me at the house. "But I heard what happened. About the will. About you." I stepped aside, inviting her in. Her boots echoed faintly on the hardwood floor, her gaze roaming the space with quiet awe. "I came back last month. Just for a visit, but something made me stop by today." I offered her tea. We sat at the old kitchen table, one of the few pieces I'd kept from Grandpa's time. For the next hour, we talked about everything. She had become a youth counselor, working with kids who didn't have much of a home, like I once didn't. She told me about her mother's illness, about loss and rebuilding. And I told her my story, what happened with Connor, the estate, and how Grandpa had left behind something far more valuable than money. "You were always the one with a quiet kind of strength," she said. "I'm glad people finally see it." We ended up walking the vineyard, just as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in copper and lavender. It felt peaceful, natural. As she turned to leave, she hesitated. "Elliott, do you ever think about starting fresh, not just for the estate, but for yourself?" I didn't answer right away, but I walked her to her car and watched as she drove away, dust curling in the dusk behind her. Inside, I sat by the fireplace, holding Grandpa's old watch in my hands. I thought about that question, starting fresh. The truth was, I already had, but maybe there was still more to come. Months passed. The estate flourished. I restored the vineyard, repaired the farmhouse roof, and opened a small tasting room, just like Grandpa once dreamed. It wasn't just a business, it was a home, a second chance, a declaration that I wasn't the forgotten son. I was the rightful heir to something far greater than bricks and land. Word spread quickly around Hollow Ridge. At first, people were cautious. I didn't blame them. After all, they'd only known me as the quiet, overlooked brother. But slowly that changed. Neighbors dropped by to lend tools. Former clients of Grandpa came to offer advice, support and stories. One woman, Mrs. Talbot, stood in the courtyard one day, looking around with tears in her eyes. "Your grandfather helped me keep my home when no bank would lend. I see him in you, Elliott. You've got his heart." That moment stayed with me. Then one morning, I received a letter, legal, crisp and impersonal. It was from my brother. Connor had moved to a small town upstate after selling off everything he could. The estate money he fought so hard for had run dry. No investments, no savings, just debt and pride. In the letter, he apologized, not directly, but in the way someone does when the weight of failure finally cracks their pride. "I thought I deserved it all," he wrote, "but I was only trying to prove I wasn't second best. I see now, I was wrong. Grandpa knew better." I folded the letter and placed it in the back of Grandpa's journal. I didn't write back. There was nothing more to say. That summer, I held a gathering at the vineyard, small, just friends and neighbors. We drank wine under the hanging lights, told stories, and played Grandpa's favorite jazz on the old record player. Mara came too. She stood beside me in the garden, barefoot, holding a glass of Cabernet. "I like this version of you," she said, nudging me gently. "What version is that?" I asked. "The one who finally took up space." And she was right. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into a family that never saw me, but now I had room. I had roots. I had become the man Grandpa always believed I could be, not out of revenge, not for recognition, but for me. As the stars blanketed the sky and laughter echoed across the vineyard, I looked up and whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa. You gave me more than a house. You gave me back myself." The legacy he left wasn't in acres or titles. It was in the belief that I mattered, and that was everything.